Okay, I wanted to do a little vid on this guy here, Yankee Marshall. Now, I've just started watching, I've been kind of getting back into guns again, as my videos lately have made clear. So I've been watching a few, some gun vids on YouTube, not that many, so I've actually learned a little about the YouTube, gun video scene and who the people are. And for whatever reason, I came across this guy, I came across James Yeager, some guy Never Enough Ammo or something like that, or maybe just Never Enough. And those probably aren't the best, or the Hickok 45, of course, or the most famous. I don't know, Hickok's pretty famous, but for whatever reason, they're the ones I know about. So, yeah, Yankee Marshall. I mean, I like him fine. I like him. I think he's pretty well spoken, I guess. Obviously, he has a successful YouTube channel, a billion times more successful than mine. But I'm going to make this video to kind of criticize him a little bit. Just because that's kind of how contrarian that I am. I can tell that, for one thing, he likes to make like dick jokes, and I'm not really, I don't get the appeal of that at all. Never have, never will. Guys talking about other guys' stuff, never, when I first came on the internet, I'm old enough to remember when the internet started, and I realized that was like a thing, that there's like there's like males that are like evidently straight males obsessed with like penises. Is like, not obsessed, but even like, I mean, it just struck me as the weirdest thing. I'm like, why would you, I know there's some video games where you could draw and stuff. And you can draw, like, let's say there's a mountain in the video game. You can draw the mountain. And I went on the some forum, and they're like, oh, yeah, first thing people are going to do is draw a bunch of penises on that mountain. And I'm thinking, like, is this a thing? Like, people really do that? Like, like, why? It just seems so unnatural and, like, not, like, I don't know. It seems fake to me or something. Like, it's not, I don't believe that that's a real thing people like to do. Anyways, on to Yankee Marshall. I just had a few things to kind of like whine and complain at him about. Like I said, I don't dislike him really. He seems a little leftist on politics, which I don't go for, other than his gun reviews, of course. But one thing, and I'm probably even wrong on what he says, and he has a lot of good advice, that's fine. A lot of good videos, that's fine. But I've noticed, to my knowledge, I haven't like strictly researched this, but here's some of his views. These are just from watching a few of his vids here and there, usually partially. I'm usually not even going to sit through the whole video or whatever. But so it's probably even wrong. I'm not talking from a position of like, I know everything about the Yankee Marshall. I've watched probably 10 parts of 10 of his videos or something like that. But I've already figured out some things that he likes to like stand for, and how I kind of disagree with them. One is, he made a video where he talks about how Glocks are, why he hates Glocks. Of course, he doesn't really hate Glocks. He says they're good. And his basic thing was, Glocks are not the best at anything, but yet you go on certain forums and people are going to recommend them for anything. Well, first of all, I don't think that's true. Like, if you go on a forum and you say, hey, I need a gun to hunt, grizzly bear in Alaska, nobody's going to say Glock. So I don't know what these boards are Yankee Marshall's on. He sets up this pretense of, there's all these people on the internet that say Glock is the answer to any gun problem, and that's why I hate Glock, because they're fanboys. But like, it seems to me to be a false pretense to start with. I mean, like I said, if you go on a forum and say, hey, I'm going to Alaska and I might encounter a grizzly bear, what do you guys recommend? Everybody's going to say like a 44 Magnum, 357 Magnum, whatever. Nobody's going to say, Glock. So I don't know where he gets that. People recommend Glock for everything, and they're not the best for everything. That's not true. I think he just kind of made that up, Yankee Marshall. He compared it to a Honda Civic, and if you ask about cars and everybody says Honda Civic, it's not true. I don't know of any gun boards or people that do that. I've never seen it, so I don't know what he's talking about. Anyways, I'm sure, no more than people who go around saying Smith & Wesson revolvers for every single thing, and there's a lot of people who just swear by Smith & Wesson J-frame revolvers. So am I going to go, Smith & Wesson J-frame revolvers suck because so many people on the internet are like, man, you need to get a Smith & Wesson J-frame. And I will say I've seen a lot more people comment all the time about Smith & Wesson J-frame revolvers than anything, any Glock thing. They're kind of almost like a cult of themselves, Smith & Wesson J-frame is the best concealed handgun, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not. Not even close to the best concealed handgun. But anyways, be that as it may. So that's the number one thing. Oh yeah, he said Glocks aren't the best in anything, and I'm just thinking like he gave a couple examples like they don't have the best triggers, and I don't know what else. But I mean, it just strikes me as kind of dumb because what gun is the best at anything? The only gun that's going to be the best at something is going to cost thousands of dollars. He said like it doesn't have the best trigger pull. Well, what does that mean? What gun has the best trigger pull that doesn't cost? It's going to be a gun that you take to a gunsmith and pay him $500 to do a trigger job on it. What does that got to do with anything? And he mentioned like a single action 45 trigger. Okay, single action 45 triggers are nice. That's because they're single action. It's not what the Glock is designed to do. It's, you're meant to carry it, so it has to have kind of a strong. Nobody wants to carry a cocked and locked 45 so you don't shoot your nuts off. How is that held against the Glock? I don't. Now, I don't love Glocks or anything. I'm not like any of these people. I got a horse in the race. I don't care. What does Glock have going for it? They're known to be super reliable. That's the main thing. They're pretty easy to shoot. They're just like Ford or something like that. They're just a basic thing. But so is the Smith & Wesson revolver. There's nothing so grand, and Smith & Wesson revolvers are even more expensive. But there's nothing grand about a Smith & Wesson revolver. It's if a Glock's a Honda Civic, then a Smith & Wesson revolver is a Toyota Corolla. There's nothing grand and special and super skilled or super high class about a revolver either, a Smith & Wesson revolver either. It doesn't have the best trigger. It doesn't have so on and so forth. It's not going to be the most accurate. It may be somewhat more accurate than Glock. But I mean, for me, what do you use a Glock for? It's generally like you're not taking it hunting, at least generally. Yeah, I think each thing has its pluses and minuses. What's a Glock for? Personal defense, home defense. Possibly like plinking, shooting at the range. Shooting fast. What's a revolver for, in my opinion? Woods. That's what I get a revolver. You take that to the woods. And you get a 357 revolver, and you can hunt deer with it. You can shoot bear with it, or I don't know why, but to me, just taking a polymer frame 9mm, like say camping, just seems wrong. I mean, yes, you can do it. Yes, I would do it. But you know what I mean? It seems sort of wrong to me. It seems, I can't even say why I think this. Maybe the reliability being better or something. But to me, it's just like a revolver is the outdoors woods hunting camping gun. And a semi-auto is the city self-defense or shooting at the range fast gun, But, yeah, so I just think he's wrong kind of about, first of all, like I said, he says Glocks aren't the best at anything. Well, I'd say they're the best at being a reasonably affordable, reliable, and super reliable. If they're the best at anything, you could argue they're the best at reliability among semi-autos. I don't know of any semi-auto that's going to be considered markedly more reliable. Can you tell me? I mean, maybe the SIGs or the Smith & Wesson, there's a lot of reliable semi-autos out there. Is there one that's known to be just always more reliable than a Glock? I would say no. So right there, he's wrong. Glocks are the best at something. Not only the best at something, they're best at, arguably the most important thing, reliability. And then you can turn around and say, well, revolvers are more reliable. Well, I mean, okay, I'll buy that. But I'm saying that for semi-auto, because semi-autos have huge advantages, which is they carry 15 plus rounds. They shoot real fast. They're lighter and smaller. So yeah, I mean, a revolver might be more reliable. Even that's debatable. Like if you asked me to bet my life on it, I would say a revolver's more reliable, but to be honest, like I've got a little revolver. Granted, it's a little North American mini rimfire revolver, so it probably doesn't count. But I don't believe I've ever had a failure to fire with my Glock that I remember ever, 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 ever. Not one. Now I wouldn't change my opinion of it any if I did, but I don't believe I ever have. Ever. Did I mention that? And I've had the thing 10 years. I haven't shot just the most rounds in the world through it, but my little North American mini revolver, I've had several light strikes with it, probably 10 or something, and way less rounds than the Glock. So, how is the revolver just intrinsically more reliable? Now, again, if you want to sit there and debate me on that, do I believe revolvers are intrinsically more reliable than some others? Yes. I think that's fairly undebatable, but just the same way. First of all, it's a matter of degree. It's like this. Okay, some people would try to act like, oh, reliability is just every gun's going to fail. I don't care. It's a man-made machine. It's not perfect, and that goes for any revolver in the world, just the same as in a semi-auto in the world. I mean, look at a revolver and cock it or shoot a few rounds, and what do you see? It's a machine. It's got moving parts. It's you know what I mean? It's there's a functioning mechanism made out of steel and springs, and if you have that, then things can go wrong. Period. Maybe they go wrong less often than honestly, with the way Glocks are, they're almost perfectly reliable. So but I will admit that probably a revolver is more reliable. I just don't think it matters, because you're talking, like I said, let's put it this way. Let's say if you have a gun and you fire 10,000 rounds through it. And with the revolver, you have some kind of malfunction. I don't know what it may be. Light strike, a cylinder binds up. I don't even know what happens on a revolver. Cylinder's not aligned correctly or something. I don't know. The trigger suddenly just stops working. I don't know what. Let's say you have a revolver and you have one malfunction in 10,000 rounds. Now let's say you have a Glock and you have two malfunctions in 10,000 rounds. In no way am I saying that this is applicable to real life. So are you going to go, well, reliability is the most important thing, you got to go with the revolver, forget the Glock? No, a certain amount of unreliability is acceptable. I'm sorry, but 2 rounds out of 10,000 doesn't matter. It's so small of an amount that it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen if you're in a firefight and you fire 5 rounds. It's not going to be that 0.0001% that malfunctions. More than likely, and that's what you're betting on, and that's what everybody in the world knows. That's why there's not special forces or military in the world that would go into combat with revolvers, because they're not dumb. I mean, granted, they're going to use rifles, but their sidearm is always going to be some sort of semi-auto. Why? Because semi-autos are better at killing people. Yankee Marshall may not want to admit it, but that's just the facts. Why are they better? There, myriad reasons. First off, you get a double stack 9, you're talking 15, 18, some of these double stack 9s, forget 15. That's how many my Glock 19 holds. You got almost 17, 18 rounds. You put one in the chamber, you're talking 18, 19 rounds in the fucking gun. It's crazy. That's 3+ cylinders of revolver ammo. And here's one way I put it. I heard it, somebody put it, or saw in an article put it one time, and I agree pretty much totally. He said, look, revolver, you have more risk of a malfunction with a semi-auto. With the revolver, though, you have an equal or greater risk, and that risk is a little different and harder to mentally process, but the risk is that you don't get enough lead out downrange fast enough. And I thought about that, and that's so true. That's what it is. If you've got a 6-shot revolver, you can't get those 6 shots double action off as fast as you can shoot a Glock 6 shots. You just can't, unless you're Jerry Miculek. You're 1 in a million. And even Jerry Miculek, if he practiced as much, would shoot the Glock faster. Hate to break it to you. So you're not getting the rounds downrange as fast, and you don't have nearly enough of them. And that's the risk you're taking with the revolver. And so to pretend like yes, there's more risk of a malfunction on a semi-auto. But a lot of people aren't really, I mean, they intuitively know it, and that's why like I said, every military uses semi-auto. But you may not necessarily think of it that there's an equal downside risk to a revolver. Greater, actually. That's why they're not preferred for combat. So yeah, that's my point on that, is that. And, another thing is, he says all this crap about, he's one of these people, revolvers are much easier to carry, because of the way they, bullshit. I think he says because they don't have the big slide. Okay, look at this fucking gun he carries. First of all, the thing is the size of a tank. You could carry a damn, Glock 45 in that size. Desert Eagle. What the fuck? Like, I know for me, I have a Ruger LCP. Now, granted, I'm not going to sit there and say that it's the best self-defense gun in the world, but I can put it in my pocket and I don't even notice it. It's like a wallet. There is no revolver, period, that can do that. Believe me, I looked. Because I actually care about it, but I actually think, because it's not so much a deal in 9mm, but for the little 380 semi-autos, I believe do have some reliability issues. My LCP is pretty damn reliable. It's had like one kind of, barely malfunction, like 200 rounds. I trust it. I know it works good. But, it's not that worries. But before I bought, I did kind of a concealed carry gun. I did kind of want to see if I could find some sort of revolver or something, because I do like the inherent reliability of revolvers. And I'm going with something really small. Now, if I was going with something bigger, I'd carry a double stack Glock and forget about it. And if I was carrying something the size of this Rhino 40, I'd be carrying a double stack Glock, no question about it. Over this Rhino thing all damn day, But this idea that somehow revolvers are intrinsically easier, I think I've seen it to carry pop up a few times. It's bullshit. First of all, they're almost always heavier. You can get a light, and I did a lot of research on the latest carry guns and stuff. You can get a pretty light revolver, to be honest, but generally speaking, they're heavier. You can get a lot of LCP. You can get a lot of little 380s that are lighter. My LCP is kind of the exception, but I believe unloaded is like 9.7 ounces. Give me a revolver that's 9.7 ounces unloaded. Like, I looked up this Rhino this guy's got. It's like close to 2 pounds, close to 2 pounds. This thing's probably a solid 30 ounces unloaded. Give me a break. Even my full-size Glock 19 is like 23 ounces unloaded. Now, granted, once you load in 15 ounces 9mm, it's up to like 30 ounces, but still. So yeah, I mean, there's not a revolver in the world that's like a normal size, other than like a North American Arms Mini, that can fit in my front pocket and just disappear like my little LCP can. So strike two against, and there's nothing intrinsically that makes them easier to carry, like he says. He said something, I think, like, because you don't have that big old slide. Big old slide. What does that have to do with anything? Like if you're carrying a hunk of metal, what difference does it make if the piece? The problem with the revolvers is they got the big old cylinder sticking out. That's what makes them hard to conceal. They're like 4 inches wide. There's no way around it. And that's a way bigger drawback, no matter what this weirdo says, than a slide. I fail to see how a slide is any different than. Look at the picture on the screen. I'll move my mouse over it. See this piece where this long piece of metal starts? Or, you can start it here, wherever you want to start it. It goes all the way to here. See this? Okay, that's one unbroken line of steel. That's as long or longer than any slide. What is it? Difference does it make if there's a slide or not a slide? Or, and he says it's broken up. Yeah, it's broken up by this big thing sticking out that's even more obvious. Maybe, I don't know what his argument is. I'm saying maybe he says, yeah, but the lines are broken up with this cylinder. Yeah, you think people aren't going to notice the cylinder sticking out along with this huge hunk of metal? There's no way. But yeah, so those are my main points. Like I said, I don't dislike Yankee Marshall or anything like that, and I find his videos moderately, informative and amusing and such. But yeah, that's what I think about it. I think I also wanted to, respond to him about maybe another video he made real quick. He said, buying online is not that good, blah, blah. I bought 2 guns online from different places. They've both been perfect. They both saved me like $150 over buying locally. So, just in there, 2 purchases, I saved $300. That almost pays for the third gun. So I kind of think the prices online are so much better. And like if you're me, unless you want to drive to Dallas, which is 100 miles away, I don't have a lot of local gun shops. I've got Academy, Sporting Goods. Used to have a Gander Mountain, but they're closing. And their prices are high as hell anyway. There is a new gun. There's little pawn shops and such. Those are never going to catch any kind of deal. They're always extremely high priced. And there's a new gun store that I go to in town that is an actual gun store and all that. And they do have good prices on guns. I've noticed that everything else they have seems to be pretty expensive. The optics, the ammo, and everything else seems pretty expensive. But they seem to make up for it and draw in with their loss leaders with some pretty dang solid actual gun firearm prices. I got my Ruger LCP there for $199, which at Academy it's like $229. Granted, it was on sale, but still. It's the same way with all their guns. They have very competitive prices, but you can still almost always do better online. Yeah, the things Yankee Marshall said about buying online that are drawbacks are true, but to an extent. But I would say, buy from Bud's Gun Shop. Now, I don't love Bud's Gun Shop or anything like that, but Bud's Gun Shop is basically the Walmart of online gun shops. And what's the advantage? Why do I always tell people, and it's just a rule in life, you want to buy from the big guy. It doesn't make sense, unless you just know that they produce junk or that their customer service is terrible or something like that. But you kind of want to buy what everybody else is buying, or the big guy, That's why, if somebody's looking for a new TV, you don't tell them, without going into a bunch of research on what the best TV is. You can tell them, go buy a Sony, cost to fly. Now, you might, there might be better buys than a Sony. There might be cheaper buys than, but why would you, if you just, don't have time to research, why would you tell them? Or, I'd say, go buy a Sony or a Samsung. Why? Because those are huge brands. Those are the 2 biggest TV brands. You're getting a decent quality TV. You may not be getting the very best value. You may not be getting the very best TV. But you know that if you buy a Sony or Samsung, you're getting a decent product. And you're getting some quality. And you're getting a gigantic corporation that kind of has to stand behind what they sell because they sell so much. It's the same way with Walmart. If you buy something from Walmart, to a certain extent, Walmart is so big that they have to stand behind it. You can take it back 30 days later and be like, hey, this thing's a piece of crap and don't work, and they'll just take it back, no questions asked, because they're freaking Walmart. And so I've kind of followed that policy with everything, and Bud's Gun Shop to me seems like kind of the Walmart of online gun stores. So you may say they don't have good service, this and that, and they may not, I don't know, but they're, I would trust them a lot more than some hole in the wall gun site, because just by virtue of being so big, they're going to have a certain amount of customer service. But, you can argue against that all you want. But it's just the facts. And I don't love Buds, but I do like how easy they are with they basically have this feature where if your FFL dealer is in green with them, you do not have to notify them the gun is coming. You can just pick it from the list and go. I love that feature. But sometimes they're not the cheapest, so I have bought guns from other places, and it's always worked out. I've always got a perfectly good gun at a great price, and it hasn't always been a bed of roses. I guess I've bought 2 guns online. That's it. So you're not talking about a gigantic amount of sample size there, but yeah. So yeah, that's just some of my thoughts, I guess, on Yankee Marshall. How I think he's. Oh, and another thing I wanted to touch on. I knew there was something else. He's talking in another video about how I guess his big thing, I would surmise, is that 350, because it's a revolver cartridge. 357 is, and he's a revolver guy. 357 is so much, and all these idiots that think caliber is irrelevant. I guess I would put it on the. He calls them caliber CUNTs, but it's like. What? Who's the real? If you think of that term, I'm thinking of somebody like him that's like, you need this caliber, the guys who are saying all the calibers are kind of the same, right or wrong, they're the ones who are not being caliber jackasses. They're the ones who are just saying caliber doesn't matter that much. The ones who are being sticklers and anal about it are the people who are saying you must have a 357 or you must have a 45 ACP or whatever, you know. So he's kind of backwards right away right there. He's not the one trying to, I mean, the caliber, the guys, caliber Nazis or whatever, I don't want to say the word he uses, they're not the ones trying to enforce, they're generally, if I understand it correctly, they're the ones who say, like James Yeager, that he says, look, 357, 9mm, 40, 45 ACP, they all have roughly the same terminal. I don't know if he includes 357 in that. But they all have roughly the same terminal ballistics, and they're all going to kill whatever you need to kill. If you need to kill something bigger, bigger than that, get a rifle, as far as, people. I don't think he means, like, grizzly bear or something, but... And I pretty much agree. I mean, I hate to put too fine a point on it, but... Now, is 357 better if you've got one shot and you need to stop a 400-pound guy coming at you? Is anybody going to take a 9 over 357? No, but again, it's a matter of degree. It's sort of like saying, you know what? A 5.56 AR is better than a 357 or a 308, whatever, if you want to go even farther. So why would you carry a 357 when you could carry a 308? Well, because it's not very practical to carry a 308, or even a 500 Smith & Wesson mag. But you see how it becomes a matter of degree, Yes, a 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum is much better than a 357. That doesn't mean you want to carry a 500 Smith & Wesson. Same thing with, yes, a 357 Magnum is better than a 9mm. It doesn't mean you want to carry a 357. You're giving up too much, in my opinion. I wouldn't carry a revolver. I mean, I would, but I wouldn't. If I was, I don't think it's the best choice. Let's put it that way. Yes, 357 better than 9mm. Yeah, does it matter? No, arguably. Is it enough better that it matters? No, at stopping people. Never mind that you're talking about the average 9mm. Double stack is probably going to be 20 rounds versus 6 in a 357, So, yeah, and I forgot about how much faster semi-autos reload. That alone is huge. And, if somebody tries to sit there and say, well, I'm just as good reloading with a revolver, no, get out of here, Fundamentally, it's much easier to reload a semi-auto. So you put that advantage on top of the ammo advantage that's already there, and I mean, and he says, oh, you don't need more than a few rounds, you're not going to be involved in a running gun, but well, it's nice to a point. I believe FBI, there's some thing about FBI statistics say most gun encounters are 2 rounds or less or something. Okay, would you be satisfied, Mr. Marshall, with a 2-round revolver? After all, FBI statistics say most gun encounters are 2 rounds. No, you probably wouldn't, Once again, it's a matter of degree, isn't it? So you think 6 rounds in a revolver is plenty. That's debatable. That's your opinion, What if somebody came along and he's like, I only carry my 45 ACP Derringer with 2 rounds because I know I'm not going to be getting involved in a running gun battle. But Yankee Marshall would be like, first one to tell him, like, well, yeah, but 6 is better. Well, I'd be the first to tell Yankee Marshall, yeah, but 15 in a double stack 9 is much better. You may not be likely to use more than 6, but we all know it's better here. And I even saw one comment that I sort of think had some validity to it. Some guy was basically like, with all the stuff going on in the world today, I just need more capacity. And think about it. Think what's on the news all the time. These terrorists, like the ones in California shooting up people with ARs, AK-47s, and everything else. Is it necessarily likely? No, but all you gotta do is turn on the news and see that it's a thing, and it's kind of happening more and more, So, I guess my point is, a Glock is much better than any revolver for self-defense. Plain and simple, everyday carry. Personally, I think it's too big. I wouldn't carry one anyway. But you know, I carry either Ruger LCP little 380, which I put the extended mag on, so 7 in the mag, 1 in the chamber, so it's 8. Most revolvers only have 5 of concealed carry, so some have 6. And you know, if you want to carry a monster like this Yankee guy, I think some have 8. I was watching some of his videos. Some may have 8 nowadays even. I mean, I know some little 22s have had 10 and so forth, but yeah, that's just my response to the whole, you know, like I said, the size of the hunk of metal he's carrying, you can carry easily, you know, a Glock 26, 10 rounds, Glock 19, 15 rounds, 1 in the chamber, 16 rounds, you know, and you can put a lot of lead downfield really fast that you can't with that revolver he's got. And okay, the revolver may be a little more accurate. Does it really matter? You know, are you going to be sitting there, oh, I got to shoot him in the eye at 20 yards? You know, more than likely you're going to be trying to put a couple rounds in the center of mass at 10 yards or something, you know. And the Glock's plenty accurate for that. So yeah, it's just, and the caliber thing, like I said, is 357 better? Yes. Does it matter? Probably not. I know one of these recent school shootings, the guy killed like 19 people. It was a few years ago, but I distinctly remember he used the 9mm, and that tells you how deadly the dang thing is. I mean, he killed, you know, a lot of people, like 11 or 19 people or something, and he just used the 9mm handgun. You know, it's pretty deadly. And like I said, you can just get into this whole game if you say, oh, well, I need to. Well, why not just, you know, why not have a carry a 44 Magnum then? You know, because it's all trade-offs. And the point is, where do you draw the line? And I would say that 9mm is plenty good enough. That's where I would draw. Well, I would take 380 fine because it's a lot more concealable. But I'm just saying between 9mm, 357, and plus he's using a 40, which I don't even think is much better than 9mm. But anyway, so that's my thoughts on Yankee Marshall and some of his opinions. Just, you know, just trying to be a little contrary. I don't really dislike the guy.